Hola, buenos días. Bienvenidos al Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Monterrey. Hoy cerramos el ciclo de charlas sobre diseño museográfico con expertos, el cual ha sido posible gracias al apoyo del Consulado General de los Estados Unidos en Monterrey. A continuación presentaré a nuestra invitada, Andrea Nitsche Krupp, es curadora adjunta de Nuevos Medios en el Museo de Arte Moderno de San Francisco, donde actualmente se encuentra trabajando en la retrospectiva de Nam June Paik. Antes de trabajar en esta institución, colaboró en la Colección Kramlich de San Francisco, así como en la Biblioteca y Museo Morgan de Nueva York, la Biblioteca Nacional de Francia en París y el Drawing Center de Nueva York. Ha contribuido en publicaciones para diversos museos, entre ellos el Tate Modern de Londres. Aquí en marco colaboró en la exposición de Rafael Lozano Gemer, Presencia Inestable, la cual se presentó en el año 2019 al 2020. Esta charla será dictada en inglés, pero podrán colocar sus preguntas en el chat en español o en inglés, como ustedes gusten, para leérselas por nuestra parte al final a Andrea. Bueno, thank you, Andrea, for accept to give this talk. Welcome to Marco.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and thank you everyone for coming out to listen. I'm excited to share a little bit about Nam June Paik with you today because it's been a big part of my life for about 3 years. So I'll just launch into the PowerPoint if that sounds good. 1 second, screen sharing. Okay. Can everybody see this? Thank you. Okay, so this is the entrance to Nam June Paik at SFMOMA's installation. And just to say again, I'm Andrea Nitsche Krupp, and I'm Assistant Curator of Media Arts at SFMOMA. And for the past almost 3 years, I've had the great pleasure of working on this exhibition with Rudolf Freeling, who's the Curator of Media Arts at SFMOMA, and co-curator of the Nam June Paik retrospective, which we curated with Soo-Kyung Lee at the Tate Modern. And the exhibition opened at SFMOMA just in May after a lot of crazy delays related to the pandemic. And it had previously opened at the Tate Modern and the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And after SFMOMA, it's going to go on to the National Gallery of Singapore in December. And so just to give you a general sense of Paik, he's a multimedia artist who was born in what is now South Korea and spent most of his life in Japan, Germany, and the US. And the retrospective, which is really the first US retrospective since the artist's death, and the first ever major West Coast retrospective. So we were really pleased to bring this show to San Francisco. And it traces the artist's 5-decade career from which started in the late 1950s to the early 2000s, beginning with early performances, interactive instruments that he created, early CRT TV and video manipulations, TV robots, satellite broadcasts, and really large scale installations. And you may be familiar with Paik as what he's often called the father of video art. And of course, Paik's prescient understanding of the potential of new technologies and mass media plays a large part in the retrospective. But we also really tried to reposition Paik and his practice in terms of a few main themes, which is transnationalism, really Paik as that first truly global artist, the participatory nature of his work, and his origins in music, and the collaborative nature of his radical avant-garde practice. So our approach to curating the show and designing the exhibition at SFMOMA, we really tried to mirror Paik's own practice, specifically in terms of those key themes. So transnationalism, participation, music, and collaboration. So we worked as collaboratively as possible across all the museum departments, and then really closely with our partner institutions in London and Amsterdam and Singapore, and tried to prioritize the participatory aspects of the work in the way that we designed the show. So really importantly to all of this is that we had the tremendous benefit of having a really close working relationship with the Nam June Paik estate, which is run by Paik's nephew, and it's overseen by a curator named John Huffman, who was Paik's assistant for over 30 years. So John Huffman is local in San Francisco. He actually lives just a couple blocks from me in this foggy weather. And he would sort of channel Paik and remind us of what his experience of working with Paik on installing shows over those 30 years, and give us a much better sense of what maybe Paik would have thought about some of our choices, which sometimes was in line with what we would expect and sometimes not. So let me continue. This is, oops, here we go. In 1961, Paik created this score, which really was thought of as like a musical score titled Symphony for 20 Rooms. And he never realized this symphony, but he returned to it again and again throughout his career. This is, in fact, he originally wrote it in German in 61, and this is a 1974 recreation in English. But we really wanted to start the show by thinking about this score, because it really works as kind of a, an analogy for Paik's practice at large. It stages a series of encounters with space. Each square represents a different room, and it has various audio, visual, and sensorial experiences, like the sound of children playing in Montmartre, or a live chicken, incense, rocks, a German TV announcer, complete darkness, the smell of vinegar, a strong wind, a hot stove, a Chinese opera, etc., etc., everything you could possibly think of. And each room is very distinct. So we did a blow up of this score on the landing at SFMOMA, which really isn't like the most compelling visual, but it's a space where people kind of congregate, and you have a chance to like look in detail at this text. And we like to think about this as really, that analogy for Paik's practice, so that you can maybe reference it as you're going through the show. And it really puts a finer point on the fact that his origins come from music. He was a classical composer before he was anything else, classically trained. And he shifted towards expanding the parameters of music to include sensory perception at large, and really critically, an active role for the audience. So today I thought I would just sort of walk through the exhibition and highlight our approach to exhibition design for the retrospective as a means of really honoring the artist's approach to presenting his own work. And I'll focus on just a couple of priorities, like distinct immersive spaces, similar to each room of this symphony, focused narratives, and how we managed to handle interactivity during a global pandemic, which was still an issue. So first, distinct immersive spaces. We started the show with an intro gallery that was not chronological, but sort of touched on key themes of his work. And we really kept it very minimal, with black and white walls and iconic work that featured live feeds and Paik's interest in Zen Buddhism, his minimalism, and really also his humor, and his first musical scores and performances. And really that works that showcase his profound knowledge of Eastern and Western philosophy. So we also importantly brought Paik's own voice into the show as much as possible in each space. So the quote on the wall up here is the text that you read, as boring as possible, like Proust, Palestrina, Zen, Gregorian chant, Missa, Parisian cafe, life, sex, and dogs staring into the distance, which Paik, he really played with language. He was a writer, he was a prolific essayist, which you don't hear in regular accounts of his work. And he spoke French, German, Korean, and Japanese and English all fluently, but he sort of slipped between them and combined them. And he was very hard to understand in spoken language, but there's nothing can really replace his voice. So we brought it in as much as humanly possible. So you'll see quotes in many of the galleries. So after that first gallery, the first real gallery after the intro is devoted to Paik's formative 1963 solo exhibition, which was called Exposition of Music, Electronic Television in Wuppertal, Germany. And the show wasn't an immediate sensation by any means, but it marked really a monumental shift in art history. So this gallery, we tried to partially restage that show because it was so important. And it's hard to do because the show itself was a total free-for-all. He took over a bourgeois villa in Germany, in a small town in Germany, and filled it with interactive objects and musical instruments, really from the basement to the top floor bathroom to the yard. And we, you can't, these are, at this point, these aren't interactive for the most part. Some works we're able to make interactive, but this was as crowded as our registrars were really comfortable letting us do here. But it's one of the spaces where we also used a blow-up photograph of Paik in that original exhibition with photos from '63 of the work that you see presented. And we did this differently at the Tate and the Stedelijk, and we really tried to communicate with them about different approaches to showing this important exhibition. And because so much of Paik's work is now obsolete technology, everything doesn't necessarily travel well. So it was a hard show to have 4 different venues and get the same loans for every venue. So different works were presented at Tate and the Stedelijk than there were at SFMOMA, though we managed many repeats. Here's what it looked like at the Stedelijk, for instance. They chose to blow up photos, large photo archival photos of the original show. We used this great map of the original villa with photos to sort of help people get their bearings in the space and understand what it was like to experience that sort of chaotic and fun exhibition in which Paik really debuted his first interventions into television sets. And many of the work was interactive. And I'll return to that point later on because we were able to keep some work interactive. So that's our first sort of immersive space. Here's a sample of some of the archival photographs that we're showing. We also showed one of these pianos, prepared pianos that Paik had invited viewers to interact and play with any of these objects in the space. And there's this great story that Joseph Beuys, this is '61, before Joseph Beuys, the German artist, conceptual artist and teacher and performer himself, he came and took an axe to one of the pianos, just destroyed it. And Paik, in fact, embraced this response and said, this is welcomed by the work. Any audience participation is fine by him, to give you a general sense of Paik's attitude. So the show is really punctuated by some very distinct immersive spaces, specifically at key moments in the show. And this is a really fantastic work by Paik, TV Garden, which you may have heard of, from 1974, which involves, in our presentation, about 40 CRT television sets and live plants in a darkened space, and each television is blaring Paik's masterwork video Global Groove from 1973. So it's very loud. The video itself is sort of like a first music video with sources from around the world. There's like Japanese Pepsi commercials and taiko drumming and people dancing the Charleston and an indigenous singer and a baby laughing, like many different situations. And this was quite the undertaking to put this together. This is Josh Churchill, our technician, connecting each of these monitors before we installed the plants And we had to source all of these plants, and they're on plastic with tape around because we were worried about insects. And it was this took about 3 months just to get those TVs working and networked, and the plants sourced and everything up and running. And it ended up looking like this in this really large immersive space. We wanted the footprint to be as big as possible. Paik really wanted this work to be loud, and it was loud. We put some sound panels, but they really invaded many other spaces. And this was in some ways a compromise we were making, that normally you wouldn't want to have sound bleed between each of our galleries to the extent that we did in this show. But because we worked so closely with the estate, their curator reassured us that really crosstalk of audio is something Paik would have liked. And we took that as a cue and this is another work that had different installations at Stedelijk and Tate. Tate on the left here, they had a sort of a corridor, and because of regulations that they have in the UK related to insurance and space, stand and look at it. And Stedelijk had a little bit more space, but what we really wanted to emphasize at SFMOMA was this sort of immersive garden experience that audience members could enter. And that's how Paik chose to exhibit the work during his lifetime. It's this real balance between technology and nature as something that really exists in harmony. We also, in other areas, we tried to take, so for TV Garden, we have a lot of examples from Paik's lifetime of how he showed that work. Because it's popular, as you can imagine, it's really fun video and the plants. And so it's been shown many, many times, and we have lots of examples to look to. But for other work in the show, we really had to take our cues for presentations from Paik's sort of philosophy and the work as we understood it, rather than maybe an exhibition history or something, advice from the estate. So this work, Paik's first composition, Hommage à Jean Cage, is a work he created in 1959 with found audio. Some of it's really unpleasant, like screeching, some of it's music. And Paik was really indebted to John Cage, the experimental composer and artist, who's his lifelong teacher and collaborator and really a close friend of Paik's. And he introduced Paik to chance operations, Zen Buddhism, and really the incorporation of silence within work and the ambient influence into his own music. So understanding that that's Paik's relationship with Cage's work, we put this audio on the terrace in the middle of the exhibition so that the sound really intermixes with the street sound below from 3rd Street, right in front of SFMOMA, with Paik's spoken and musical and atonal composition. And sometimes it's really surprising and sometimes it works, and we're really happy with how that turned out. And so this again is like halfway through the show, and we took this moment to refer back to the Symphony for 20 Rooms, which you can see across the atrium, to sort of remind our audience of this through thread. And then in terms of immersive spaces in the show, it really culminates in, Zen for Film. This is another example of Paik's lessons from John Cage, where Zen for Film is it's a blank film reel that runs through a projector and casts a light on the wall. And then the content of that film, if you can call it that, is just the dust and scratches that accumulate during the course of the exhibition. So it's really blank. And then also whatever happens in front of that light source. And our audiences have had a really, really fun time interacting with the work. It's been a surprising Instagram sensation. But this room devoted to Paik's collaborations with John Cage is halfway through the show. narrative from a critical moment in the 1950s again. So we have sort of two parallel tracks throughout the show, which is why we return to this black wall minimalist presentation. So the final work in the show, I'm skipping over many things, but really his immersive spaces. Paik represents Germany in the Venice Biennial. And Paik created this work, Sistine Chapel, that involved many, many huge CRT projectors, which you see here on scaffolding, and projected video, 4 channels of video and audio onto every surface of the pavilion space. The ceiling, which Paik calls the most underutilized museum space, and the walls, and it's loud and it shifts constantly. It switches. He made a custom switcher that switches each video channel in an unpredictable way. So every time you see the work, it will be a new version. And this hadn't been restaged since 1993. And we worked really closely with the estate for about 3 years to understand what it would mean to recreate this with their assistance, because we feel like it's a critical work to share in this moment. Not only is it fitting for a Paik retrospective because the video content addresses work from throughout Paik's career. So it's really this revisiting of his entire career in video. And then it also highlights this immersive space and interactivity that we love to highlight here. So we did in fact install it in SFMOMA's galleries, this time with much, much smaller projectors, thankfully. And it's been the highlight of the show, I would say, for sure. So the second thing we really tried to do, in addition to immersive spaces, is sort of focus in on specific narratives. For example, at the Tate, experiments, and this was in part a result of the space that they had for the show, which was less flat. The wing of the Tate, it's sort of a series of rooms that can't be changed to the degree that SFMOMA's galleries on the 4th floor where this show was are modular. You can move each wall and have different configurations. The Tate was more limited in their space, so they had to show it's a large the similarities between his works in terms of experimentation. All of Paik's work was wildly experimental. So it doesn't quite pin down a useful narrative through which to tell this story to our audiences. You get a bit lost, even though each of these works is fantastic in its own right. So within, this is looking the other way in the Tate's galleries. Within SFMOMA space, we broke up these works into 2 galleries. This is a studio space devoted to in-process work and experimentation and early video, and Paik's collaborations with engineers and technical professionals, most notably Shuya Abe, who was a Japanese engineer with whom he created the first video synthesizer, which is this funny looking object on the right, which surprisingly everybody wanted to touch. I don't know what's so compelling about this video synthesizer, but it was very popular. Anyway, something we did in this space was to keep the walls, just the drywall. We had a lot of different ideas and we were a bit budget constrained, but we ended up just keeping it as an indication of the studio workshop space. There's no way to recreate Paik's own studio because it was chaotic and incredible and full of everything you could possibly think of, which we couldn't have managed to do to the degree that we would have been comfortable with at SFMOMA. So one side of the gallery is this in-process work, some early text, his first video in which he worked with the early computers to create images. And then the other side is finished work that sort of showcases experimental practices, like magnet TV here on the left, in which he put a large magnet on top of a CRT monitor that creates that image. Originally, this work was interactive. You could move the magnet and change the image on the screen. And in fact, we had to change the image once a week. We moved the magnet so to avoid image burn-in. This is from the Whitney. We had someone from the Whitney Museum walk us through the process. And this work also, we had to adjust our expectations and put out stanchions and toe tape and signage because everybody wanted to touch this work. And it's fine to touch it, really, it's pretty durable, but the magnet itself is very, very heavy, and were it to fall, it could be really problematic. But it's really a masterwork. I love the simplicity of an intervention into the television as medium. The way in which Paik is both this minimalist artist and then this total maximalist with a barrage of images. And here's another place where we included a Paik quote on the wall. And the second gallery that we broke up that experiments gallery into, we called Live Feed, which features interactive works that showcase a live video feed. This is a wonderful work called 3-Camera Participation, which breaks up a visitor's shadow into these 3 color spectrums and then projects it onto the wall and shows it in the monitor. And that's a work that we've been able to keep interactive, of course, because it doesn't involve any touch surfaces. There's a close-up of the monitor in that space. And this was a very popular gallery. It was really pared down to just 3 works, which really enabled us to tell this focused narrative about Paik's interest in live feed television and playing with that circuit. Additionally, the robots that were originally at the Tate, we swapped them out for robots that were specifically related to Paik's collaborators. And we were very, very pleased to get this robot, John Cage Robot 2 from Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas, which represents John Cage, and this Merce Digital robot on the right, which represents Merce Cunningham, Cage's partner in life and in art, and choreographer and dancer, really avant-garde artist with whom Paik collaborated a number of times, and really an important friend and colleague to Paik. And we have a gallery that sort of tells the story about the 3 of them and their collaborative practices. And these objects really were something that Paik lovingly created first for family. They created a family of robots with a mom and dad and baby and aunt and uncle. And then he sort of expanded that practice to include historical figures and close friends and colleagues. And they each have video and included details reminiscent of that person's identity. For Cage, you've got piano keys and a cutoff tie, which relates to the first time that Cage and Paik met was an early Paik performance where Paik went into the audience and cut off John Cage's tie with scissors and then shampooed Cage's head and then left the theater and called the host by telephone to inform the audience that his presentation was finished. And of that moment, John Cage famously said that he would always think twice about attending another Paik performance. So the little tie that you can almost make out on this robot references that moment. And then the Merce Cunningham robot, I just love because it has that, somehow Paik managed to get this sense of dance and fluidity of movement within a very blocky, robotic. Then we also had galleries devoted to other collaborators, perhaps most importantly, Charlotte Moorman. And we have this blow-up photo of Moorman here, who's a Juilliard-trained concert cellist, playing a work by Paik called TV Cello, which is a cello made of televisions. And she's wearing TV eyeglasses, and Paik and Moorman performed together, had a working relationship for over 30 years and performed together up until Moorman's death in the 90s. And we really wanted to center Moorman's contribution to their partnership and friendship, instead of what's often the story is that, Paik is presented as this artist genius and Moorman as sort of a willing assistant or participant, but really that belies her formative as friends and collaborators to figure out how to prioritize Moorman's contribution within this show, instead of sort of Moorman through Paik. And we included posters. You can see, I think I have a better image. Posters of their concerts together, many of which Moorman designed and helped with, and photo documentation and documents from this wonderful series of avant-garde festivals in New York in the 60s and 70s that Moorman totally organized. She was really a force on the avant-garde scene in New York in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And she also kept meticulous archives of that moment. And so we tried to really showcase that as much as possible and show the original TV cello here in the corner on a plinth that sort of approximates the sense of performance of a stage, of that component of their presentation, the object as a tool for performance rather than as an object in and of itself. And then so one thing that was a huge challenge was how to show and prioritize audience participation at a time when visitors, and we had to really limit touch surfaces, of course, because of the pandemic, and figuring out how to do that in a way that still felt like it honored the integrity of each of these works. That sometimes we were successful and sometimes not. This is the example I'll give of a work called Video Commune, which was the first public debut of Paik's video synthesizer, which was what we saw from the studio room, a tool that allowed him to manipulate live TV broadcast video footage. So like live, he could change the image as it was broadcast on TV with that tool to create video effects that you would normally do in post-production. So when he first created this, he had this 4-hour-long broadcast at WGBH Boston, in which he invited audience members who were walking by, just people walking by the studio, to come in and use the synthesizer to change the broadcast. And then Paik selected his own Beatles soundtrack, just soundtrack from the Beatles back catalog, to play while random people were creating the video effects. And so he later returned to this. He made a shorter version of that work where, to keep the participatory component that was originally people changing the video, he had a recording of the original broadcast and then invited viewers to contribute their own Beatles records. So this played on TV, and then viewers at home were invited to pick whatever video, whatever Beatles song they wanted to listen to and have it sync up with the video footage. And it's kind of amazing. It weirdly works with almost any Beatles song. And what we originally wanted to do was maybe have even records in the gallery space that viewers could put on themselves and select from, that there's a lot of sort of practical reasons why that would be tricky and why our team was a bit reluctant to go that route. But one of our compromises was, well, we can at least have like a touch surface, a touchpad, an iPad or something to have viewers pick their Beatles songs in the gallery. And none of these things seemed prudent in a pandemic condition. So what we decided to do to maintain the interactive component of this work was two things. We put it online and made it accessible to audiences everywhere, which Paik would have loved. This was originally broadcast, so it was something that people would have welcomed into their own homes. And then we gave everybody like a Spotify playlist to easily reference any Beatles song they want. So invited viewers from their homes to play Beatles soundtracks while watching this online. And it's been really popular, which is great. And I'm hoping that we can continue to do that for the show. And then for the in-gallery presentation, we surveyed all of the staff working on the Paik retrospective to select their favorite Beatles song. And then we put that soundtrack on a random loop in the gallery, and it plays on a speaker. So you'll hear random songs, but at the very least, they were selected by staff that was a part of the show. So it was a bit of a compromise. We also couldn't use headphones, and that's another. So we definitely had to deal with crosses. We had the Tate, they were able to use headphones. So in this gallery, it opened in October 2019, and it was supposed to open at the Stedelijk months the following year, but the second it opened, the day that it was set to open at the Stedelijk was the day the Stedelijk had to close their doors due to the pandemic. So the Tate was the only venue that didn't have to address a pandemic condition. So they had a gallery devoted to Paik satellite broadcasts, which were work he did in the 80s. Across the world and live broadcast, sort of almost a variety show featuring many of his Cage, Allen Ginsberg, Laurie Anderson, musicians, performers from across the world, and with hosts in other countries. And in any event, the Tate was able to show 4 different works in addition to a large monitor wall, internet space, because you could handle the with headphones. And this worked really well. Pleased with this presentation. But at SFMOMA, we couldn't show, because we couldn't have that audio bleed between works, we couldn't have headphones. We decided just a dedicated gallery to project the satellite, like more cinematic space, which in fact worked really well. It was a popular gallery. They're really fun videos that you can with, so it was nice to have more of a we're supposed from German install it, and we couldn't accommodate that in the pandemic, which was a huge blow, but I'm happy with how it turned out. So in terms of interactivity, another compromise we made, this is Random Access, a work from 1963 from that first exhibition in Wuppertal, Germany. And this was installed in the basement of that villa, and Paik had pasted magnetic tape. All these strips you see are magnetic audio tape. And we don't know exactly what was on the original work. John Huffman of the estate thinks it was speeches and found music and other things. But Paik did recreate this work in 2000 for his show. And in that version, he used 4 different audio sources. One's just white noise, one's cymbals and drums, one's wave. So the everything is interchangeable. It's not historic equipment per se, but has really become a conceptual work. And we originally wanted to have this stand contains a run across each of these audio strips, and as you do, depending on how fast or slow you play that, it creates a unique composition for each performer or each audience member that decides to play this work, that you can kind of wander through it. Paik said it was like a oh gosh, what is it? At the Tate, they did invite visitors to do this because of the pandemic condition. So we decided to do demonstration a week by staff members who were trained to show the work and take some practice. So, because not everything has audio, you have to kind of find it and explore it. But we're pleased to say that we are now going to change this back to interactive, which should be good. So it was a bit of a compromise because it's not a visual work. It doesn't function unless you have that participatory component. And part of it is about an individual exploration of the work and not a demonstration. This didn't feel, I'm glad that we were able to activate it, but it's not ideal to have it be something performed instead of something explored by individuals. Certain works we were able to keep interactive because they were accommodated these new conditions. Foot switch experiment, which is also in the exposition of music, is so simple. You set up on a foot switch and there's a reaction in the 3-camera participation is meant to be interactive in this really safe way. So people have been loving that one as well. So there's ways of visitor involvement in creating each of Paik's works. And of course, everyone has been, you want to engage that work and see that how that circuit is working. And then, of course, Sistine Chapel. At the very end of the show, we wanted to pair this really kind of overwhelming work. It's loud, it contains fast cuts, variety of different sources and imagery, and it can be really overwhelming, like Paik's ultimate maximalist identity with this really beautiful simple work, one candle projection that really returns to this Zen aesthetic and the idea of the meditative light source that Paik equated with television, with video imagery, with light in general, with the moon, these themes throughout his work. And of course, the bare bones of the video components, these three colors. So this work is just as presented as if it's a side chapel to Sistine Chapel. And you have the 2 poles of Paik, this really minimalist, contemplative work with that overwhelming Sistine Chapel. So we're really pleased to sort of end the show with that. So I'm also noticing that I'm just about out of time. So I think I'll conclude there. And I hope that this was at least interesting to look at some of these images, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you may have. So I'll stop screen sharing. Thank you again.
Okay, so we are going to wait to see if somebody has any comment or question that they want to share. Let's just, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta o comentario, lo puede enviar por el chat y ya a partir de ahí lo leemos. Puede ser la pregunta en español y nosotros ya la traducimos acá. No hay ninguna pregunta. Somebody is asking if you have had any trouble with technology related to like compatibility between things in the pieces that you have worked with. I don't know if you had any issues in that area.
Yeah, definitely. It's inevitable with Paik. Thankfully, we have each venue has, well, they had a great media on hand and technical specialists that are really, so we anticipated that we would have to have a lot of technical problems with especially CRT monitors. So ahead of time, our media conservator and the manager of our technical team went out and met with CRT technicians from in New York and Washington, DC. And it's been really interesting. There's this whole community of people who know how to fix old CRT TVs, and they're people who worked with artists, people who worked with Paik, but they're an aging population. There's only a handful of people out there, one of whom is someone named C.T. Louis, who has a studio in New York, and he's on hand in New York for most Paik's work when it breaks down. So our team went to meet with him and this other technician, Dan Meyer, and these guys are all like in their 80s and still plugging away at fixing CRT monitors. So we worked with both these specialists to sort of learn how to fix what we could. You have to be careful, they can be dangerous. We don't want to take apart a CRT monitor in our galleries, but some problem solving that we could do on hand. And then we also worked closely with C.T. Louis to create exhibition copies of SFMOMA works when we could, to take the opportunity to find this aging technology when we can. We looked on eBay for a ton of monitors and then brought those monitors to technicians to fix them. So we tried to problem solve as much as we could in advance, which was learn about the technology. And then on site, we happily, I mean, knock on wood, we still have a couple months, but thought there would be. The monitors break. TV Garden, you have to check all the time to see if a monitor is working or not. It's nice because we can swap them out because there's enough of them. It's not so bad. And Paik really had quite a flexibility with like the degree to which that video image would be perfect, or the color could be a little off, or there's some room for error. But we've had a lot of conversations with each lender about what we can do and what we can do on site and when interventions are possible. But it's really opened up technicians that we've been in close touch with, and then introduced to other lenders and other institutions. So we really created a little community of Paik enthusiasts around this show.
Perfect.
I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Some people just want to say thank you for your lecture. They say it has been really interesting, and they also think that is also important how technicians have a really important role in the work of the museum in this particular type of exhibitions, how they are elements of importance in the museum. So
Thank you so much. Yeah, I completely agree with you. We couldn't have done this show without my colleague Josh Churchill, who was the lead technician, audiovisual technician. We couldn't have done the show without him. It was him and me and our conservator and the registrar really problem solving everything and thinking through how we could show the work and then what we could do to fix it. And then you just understanding what the work.
we lost you a little bit. Are you there?
Uh-oh, I'm worried my video is stuck.
Yeah, it froze a little bit. Yeah. Oh no, Andrea. Ay, una disculpa a todos. Estamos teniendo unos problemas de conectividad. Creo que tuvo que salir de la sesión. Vamos a esperar un momento a ver si regresa. Esperemos que sí. Estaba teniendo problemas con el clima en San Francisco, entonces su internet estaba fallando. Creo que por ahí lo notaron en algunos momentos en los que se cortaba el audio. Pero vamos a ver si puede regresar.
Así es, nos comentaba que en San Francisco hacía mucho frío, que estaba muy nublado y estaba afectando la transmisión. Y si no, bueno, lo positivo es que la charla la dictó completa. Entonces, esta sesión de preguntas y respuestas pues viene a complementar pues prácticamente la charla, ¿no? Entonces le damos unos 3 minutos y no, pues damos por terminada la plática.
Ok, muy bien. Y ahorita regresamos a sus preguntas, si se puede.
El ciclo de charlas sobre museografía van a publicarse en el canal de YouTube del museo, las 3 conferencias para que puedan verlas completas aquellas personas que no tuvieron oportunidad de conectarse a todo el ciclo. Entonces, bueno, pues ahora sí que en nombre del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Monterrey, agradecemos su presencia, su participación y, bueno, obviamente Andrea por compartir toda su experiencia con nosotros, la cual disfrutamos enormemente y obviamente esperamos a ver a Andrea pronto aquí en Marco con su próximo proyecto. Ella visitó Monterrey en 2019 con la exposición de Rafael Lozano Hemer. Pues un agradecimiento a todos por su asistencia. Buenas tardes.